Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything, and everyone, and every person, place, thing in between, on the outside, in the nooks and crannies of. Welcome to the show. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, a podcast, and I am your host, warrior poet, intergalactivist, international man of misery, Michael Lucht. And today is essentially an impromptu kind of, not necessarily planned episode. This is outside of the current series I'm working on, featuring Black Magic Academies, etc. This is an episode I wanted to do concerning the recent events regarding a cluster, a repetitive occurrence of mysteriously dead and or disappearing scientists, mostly scientists closely associated with UAP, the defense/military intelligence apparatus, and or theoretical physics, engineering, etc., that fall under one or more of those particular umbrellas. Before we proceed, it's essential to state clearly that no disrespect towards the individuals involved, nor their families, friends, or loved ones, is intended in any way. The names discussed in this broadcast represent real people with profound legacies, and the investigation of these events is conducted with the utmost gravity. The goal of this episode isn't to sensationalize these tragedies, but to honor the brilliance of these minds by asking the difficult questions that their work and the circumstances of their passing compels us to ask. So for many, the very injustice of these losses is what motivates this particular sort or form of research. We delve into these mysteries out of a fierce commitment to ensuring that their contributions to human knowledge are never forgotten or obscured by the chaos of the events surrounding them. Also, I'll repeatedly be referring to these events throughout this episode collectively as the cluster or a cluster. And I just want to mention now that I don't do this to minimize any one event or individual. It's more just a matter of verbal simplicity for the sake of facilitating the conveyance of information. What was originally intended as a brief introductory mini episode, a simple who's who of the recent cluster of missing and deceased researchers, has rapidly and perhaps predictably snowballed. We've moved past simple obituaries into a genuinely unsettling inquiry into the potentially contagious nature of high strangeness itself. What you're about to hear represents the raw surface level findings from an investigation that's essentially taken on a life of its own over the last several days. So as we peel back the layers of these coincidences, quote-unquote coincidences, the pattern suggests that we're looking at something far more complex than a string of unfortunate events. We're tracking a phenomenon that bridges the gap between the laboratory and the living room, an intersection where high-level defense research meets a visceral, domestic interference that some have come to call the hitchhiker effect. So basically, the way I've decided to structure this episode is first, right out the gate, I'm going to hit you with the really weird shit. Then, we'll individually examine each of the scientists, engineers, etc., which make up this most recent cluster of events or hypothetical brain drain. And then finally, we'll examine almost all, at least a healthy portion, at least, of the current potential theories behind these mysterious deaths and disappearances. Having said that, let's jump right into this muck and mire. So, the current investigation into the 2026 missing and or dead scientist cluster doesn't exist in a historical vacuum. It's the latest chapter in a long-standing tradition of intellectual deterioration. To understand why a handful of missing engineers can potentially paralyze a superpower, we must look at the precedent set by the World War II era brain drain. During this period, the strategic harvesting, quote-unquote harvesting, of human biocapital, most notably through the Manhattan Project, as well as Operation Paperclip, demonstrated that the most decisive weapon in any conflict isn't a piece of hardware, but the specific, non-transferable knowledge held within a human mind. This era established a blueprint where the acquisition of talent was synonymous with victory, a dynamic that's now inverted into a modern campaign of possible denial of service attacks, where the elimination of key researchers functions as a surgical strike against a nation's future. This pattern of high-stakes attrition found its most chilling modern parallel in the 1980 saga of the GEC Marconi deaths. During the height of the Cold War, over 25 scientists and engineers working on sensitive defense projects for the UK's Marconi Company, many linked to the United States Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, aka Star Wars, an initiative spearheaded by the Reagan administration, died under questionable or unusual circumstances that defied conventional logic. I'm going to repeat that number, 25. 25 people. These Star Wars deaths were often ruled as bizarre suicides or accidents, such as Vimal Dajubai accidentally jumping from the Clifton Suspension Bridge with an accidental, unexplained needle puncture in his thigh, or David Sands accidentally driving a car laden with gasoline cans into a brick wall, as one does. The Marconi mystery serves as a dark mirror to today's cluster, suggesting that when the stakes involve space-based defense and or advanced energy research, the personnel involved become the most vulnerable links in the national security chain. The SDI program itself provides the perfect case study for the introduction of a concept called hyperstitional warfare, a concept where a fiction or narrative makes itself real through its own propagation.
It insists upon itself.
The Reagan-era Star Wars program was, in many technical respects, a bluff. The technology to create space-based missile shields did not fully exist. However, by projecting the narrative of its existence, the U.S. forced the Soviet Union into a desperate, ruinous arms race. The Soviets, believing the fiction was a functional reality, poured their remaining resources into a technological chase they could not win, effectively driving their empire into bankruptcy. This is the essence of hyperstition, a narrative that functions as a self-fulfilling prophecy, manifesting real-world collapse through the psychological manipulation of an adversary's belief. In the 2020s, this has evolved into the hot new thing in global conflict: fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare. Unlike traditional warfare, this is a conflict of shadows, where the battlefield is the human mind and the target is the cognitive infrastructure of a nation. By orchestrating, or simply allowing the appearance of, a cluster of scientist deaths, an adversary engages in a potential hyperstitional strike. They don't need to kill every scientist to win. They only need to seed the belief that working on exotic technology is a potential death sentence. This creates a chilling effect that deters talent, stabilizes institutional morale, and slows research to a crawl. In this new era of asymmetrical conflict, the most effective way to bankrupt a rival is no longer through spending, but through the strategic management of fear and the systematic erosion of their most brilliant minds. And just a note going forward, I'm not making any definitive declarative statements that this is indeed the case as to what's going on regarding these mysterious deaths and disappearances. This is just simply one idea or theoretical framework which functions as a potential explanation behind these events. The strategic management of fear isn't confined to the laboratory or the classified briefing room. It finds its primary engine in the modern media apparatus, which serves as the central nervous system for hyperstitional warfare. In this theater, the media doesn't merely report on reality, it constructs a fiction functioning as fact by manipulating the narrative dominance, where the public judges the frequency or danger of an event on how easily examples come to mind, A primary example of this is the carefully curated narrative regarding political violence and the alleged rise of a violent radical left. Despite data from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI in its more functional pre-Crash Patel days, you see what I did there? Consistently showing that the vast majority of domestic terrorism and lethal political violence is perpetrated by right-wing extremists. The media ecosystem often amplifies Antifa or radical left rhetoric to a fever pitch. By saturating the airwaves with images of property damage or isolated protests, the media creates a hyperstitional reality where a phantom leftist insurgency is perceived as the primary threat to the republic, effectively neutralizing the actual statistical reality through sheer narrative repetition. This disparity in cognitive infrastructure is most visible in the asymmetrical media coverage of executive threats. The alleged assassination attempts against Donald Trump are frequently framed as evidence of a coordinated existential war against his movement, receiving round-the-clock coverage that reinforces a narrative of victimhood and righteous struggle. This hyper-focus serves to validate the radical left bogeyman, making the threat feel omnipresent and inevitable. Conversely, the 11 to 13 documented assassination attempts against Barack Obama during his presidency, ranging from the 2011 White House shooting by Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez, aka Orth, to the mailing of ricin-laced letters and various white supremacist plots, were often treated as isolated criminal incidents or lone wolf anomalies. By downplaying these repeated racially and politically motivated attempts on Obama's life, the media denied the public a cohesive pattern to latch onto, effectively preventing these events from becoming a hyperstitional force. In the context of fourth-generation warfare, this media-driven selective memory is a tactical necessity. When the media chooses which clusters to emphasize and which to obscure, they are actively participating in the hitchhiker effect of information. They are attaching a specific psychological weight to one side of the political spectrum while allowing the other to remain in the shadows. For any researcher investigating the 2026 scientist cluster, this provides a vital warning. The perceived mystery or pattern of these deaths is inextricably linked to who controls the megaphone. Just as the media can manifest a radical left threat out of minority events while ignoring over a decade, if not almost damn near an entire century, of right-wing plots, so too can they amplify a string of scientific tragedies into a supernatural conspiracy or a national security crisis to serve a specific geopolitical and or psychological end. The battlefield is no longer just in the trenches, foxholes, forests, or even in the labs. It's in the headlines, the algorithms, and the selective silence or amplification that follows a particular event. Speaking of hitchhiker effect, the phenomena frequently dubbed the hitchhiker effect represents one of the most unsettling developments in modern investigative research, suggesting that high strangeness is not always confined to a specific geographical coordinate. Unlike a traditional haunting, which is rooted in the soil or architecture of a site, this effect behaves more like a contagious agent. It's characterized by anomalous activity, ranging from poltergeist outbreaks and shadow figures to sudden technological failures, that effectively attaches itself to an individual during a visit to a high-activity location and follows them back to their primary residence. This suggests that the human observer acts as a biological vector, carrying the phenomena across vast distances like a psychic infection. The term gained significant traction through studies conducted at high-activity sites like Skinwalker Ranch, where seasoned investigators reported that the entities encountered on site would manifest in their own homes thousands of miles away. These occurrences often escalated, spreading from the primary witnesses to family members who had never stepped foot on the original property. This contagion model has forced researchers to reconsider the nature of the phenomenon. Rather than being a localized spirit or a physical extraterrestrial craft, the hitchhiker effect points towards something pre-physical. It suggests an intelligence that can interface with human consciousness, utilizing the observer's own internal energy or environmental surroundings to manifest its presence elsewhere. Theoretical frameworks for this effect often lean on immunological or quantum perspectives. Some researchers propose that exposure to a thin place, window area, or high strangeness zone acts as a pathogen that triggers a reaction in the human psychic immune system, resulting in the domestic hauntings as a form of symptomatic discharge. And no matter the context, discharge of any kind is hardly ever a welcome event. Others suggest a form of quantum entanglement, where the individual becomes locked to the frequency of a site, allowing the anomaly to find them regardless of physical barriers. Because this effect is frequently reported as predatory or indifferent, often accompanied by disrupted sleep, unexpected physical ailments, and a pervasive, or in some cases perhaps even perverse, sense of being watched, it's led to a shift in investigative protocols. Certain high-activity zones are now approached with the same caution as biohazard sites, emphasizing that the most dangerous aspect of an investigation may not be what you find at the location, but what decides to follow you home. The historical and clinical record of the hitchhiker effect suggests that anomalous phenomena do not merely exist within the environment of a specific designated location. They appear to adhere to the human observer as a form of psychic contagion. Within the remote viewing program, specifically the Stargate project and its predecessors at SRI International, operatives frequently reported that the act of peering into distant or non-local targets created a two-way conduit. One of the most harrowing accounts from this era involves a senior remote viewer who, after a session targeting a high strangeness site, returned to his home only to witness a physical manifestation that defied all laws of biological reality. In a well-documented instance often discussed in intelligence circles, the viewer recounted how a disembodied, translucent human arm terminating in a rusted hook hand materialized in his living room, floating independently in the air before vanishing just as suddenly as it had arrived. This event was not a fleeting hallucination, but a multi-witness occurrence that terrified his family and led to a temporary suspension of his operational duties. This pattern of domestic intrusion became the central focus of the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, or AWSAP, which formalized the study of these attachments among defense personnel. One of the primary case studies involved a high-ranking intelligence officer known as quote-unquote Axelrod, whose visit to a high-activity zone in Utah triggered an immediate escalation at his suburban residence back in Virginia. According to reports finalized in 2026, Axelrod's children began reporting blue orbs floating through their bedrooms, followed by the appearance of screaming black shadows that seemed to pace the hallways at night. Perhaps the most chilling detail was the manifestation of a giant wolf-like cryptid that was observed by both Axelrod and his neighbors. The creature reportedly stood over 6 feet tall and possessed eyes that glowed with a preternatural orange luminescence, appearing on the lawn of his private residence just days after his return from the field. A quick side note, the pseudonym Axelrod repeatedly appears with some frequency throughout various accounts of military intelligence and or defense institution involvement with and or research into anomalous phenomena. The reoccurring presence of the pseudonym Axelrod functions as a phantom thread woven through the tapestry of modern aerospace and intelligence lore, appearing with such regularity that it's become synonymous with the gatekeeper archetype. The moniker first achieved prominence within the testimonies of the late Ingo Swann, the progenitor of the Stargate project's remote viewing protocols. In his seminal work, Penetration, the question of extraterrestrial and human telepathy, Swann describes being recruited by a mysterious Mr. Axelrod into a deep black operation involving the telepathic monitoring of non-human bases on the far side of the moon. This iteration of Axelrod was described as an ultra-high-level operative with the authority to command clandestine military facilities, characterized by an intense preoccupation with the telepathic reach of non-human intelligences. The fact that this specific name reappears decades later in the documentation of the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, or AWSAP, suggests that Axelrod may not be a single individual, but a persistent operational title, a legacy pseudonym passed down within the intelligence community to designate those tasked with managing the most sensitive aspects of the U.S. government's interaction with the anomalous. Just a quick cursory Google search of the surname Axelrod yields the following results. Axelrod most commonly refers to one of three prominent figures: a famous political scientist known for game theory, which is interesting in itself, a top Democratic political consultant, also intriguing, or a fictional TV character. There's Robert Axelrod, political scientist and academic, an American political scientist best known for his work on the evolution of cooperation. He demonstrated how cooperation can emerge among self-seeking agents, individuals, or nations without a central authority, famously analyzing strategies in the prisoner's dilemma game. He utilized the phrase tit for tat. Axelrod popularized this strategy as highly effective. It means being nice, starting with cooperation, retaliating if cheated, but forgiving if the opponent cooperates again. Then there's David Axelrod, political consultant and strategist, an American political consultant and analyst who served as the chief strategist for Barack Obama's 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns. He served as a senior advisor to the president during Obama's first term and later became a senior political commentator for CNN. And there's a fictional character named Bobby Axelrod from the show Billions, as well as Julius Axelrod, a U.S. neuropharmacologist who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1970, also very intriguing, as well as musician David Axelrod, a composer and producer influential in early jazz rock fusion. Further information says, Axelrod is primarily an Ashkenazi Jewish surname of Germanic origin, likely meaning Axel's fame, or derived from a Yiddish name for Alexander. It's most notably associated with Nobel laureate biochemist Julius Axelrod and political strategist David Axelrod. The name also appears in variants like Axelrod or Axelrad. It goes on to note Julius, David, George, as well as Pavel Axelrod, a prominent Russian socialist and Menshevik, or member of the moderate minority wing of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party that split from Lenin's Bolsheviks in 1903. The name is often considered a habitation name, potentially stemming from German or Yiddish, indicating a patronymic surname that originally identified someone as a descendant or associate of a person named Axel. Any further speculations upon this particular info are entirely the listener's own. I'm simply reporting the news. Speculation regarding the true identity behind the Axelrod designation has led researchers into the heart of the American defense establishment, with many pointing toward high-ranking figures within the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, or Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or AFOSI, in the context of OSAP and Skinwalker Ranch, as detailed by George Knapp and Dr. Colm Kelleher. The Axelrod figure, often referred to as Axelrod's associates or Axelrod's team, is described as an intelligence official who facilitated the transfer of sensitive data between the ranch's private research and the Pentagon's classified archives. Some researchers analyzing the timelines and professional trajectories of the era have speculated that the moniker may have been a cover for either Rear Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, the former director of the DIA, famously linked to the Wilson-Davis memo, or perhaps a senior civilian intelligence officer like Dr. Christopher Kit Green, a prominent figure in both remote viewing initiatives as well as the lore surrounding the alleged shadowy UAP investigative gatekeeping apparatus dubbed the Aviary, whose work on the forensic pathology of UAP injuries mirrors the clinical focus of the Axelrod accounts. The significance of the Axelrod persona extends beyond mere identity. It represents the institutional memory of the hitchhiker effect itself. In the accounts provided by Dr. James Lakatsky, it was the Axelrod family that served as the primary example of the biological contagion that follows contact with high strangeness zones. By tracking the appearance of this name across different decades, from Swan's moon viewing sessions in the 1970s to the suburban hauntings of the 2010s, it becomes clear that the Axelrod lineage is the primary point of contact amidst disparate threads of the many technological and biological secrets likely deemed too destabilizing for the public cognitive infrastructure, managed by a shadowy succession of Axelrods who remain the silent custodians of the hitchhiker's path. For those seeking to cross-reference these accounts, the name Axelrod serves as a primary search term within the following leaked, quote-unquote, leaked, and declassified frameworks. You have the aforementioned Penetration by Ingo Swann, the original account of the Lunar Remote Viewing Program and the introduction of the first Mr. Axelrod. There's Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, documentation of the modern Axelrod family incidents and their role in the OSAP medical studies. There's the Wilson Davis memo. While not using the name directly, it provides the bureaucratic context for the gatekeeper role that Axelrod epitomizes.
Whoosh.
Hey, future me, I just wanted to come back and interject real quick. For those unfamiliar with the Wilson Davis memo, the Wilson Davis memo stands as one of the most significant and debated documents in the history of modern UAP research, allegedly detailing a high-level confrontation between a senior intelligence official and the gatekeepers of basically crash retrieval programs. The document consists of 15 pages of notes purportedly written by Dr. Eric Davis, a physicist and defense contractor who was notable for being one of the researchers with Bigelow Aerospace, or NIDS, out at Skinwalker Ranch. This follows a meeting in October 2002 with Rear Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA. According to the memo, Wilson recounted his efforts in 1997 to locate a deeply compartmentalized special access program, or SAP, involved in the study of non-human technology. Wilson had reportedly been alerted to the program's existence by a quote-unquote bigot list of code names provided by investigators, including Dr. Stephen Greer and Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell. And he used his authority as the DIA director to track down the specific corporate contractor holding the secrets. The memo describes a dramatic standoff in which Admiral Wilson, despite his high rank, was denied access to the program by a trio of corporate officials: a project director, a program manager, and a corporate counsel. These quote-unquote gatekeepers informed Wilson that while he had the proper security clearance, he did not have the quote-unquote need to know, as the program was a quote-unquote special category with waived oversight, even from the Pentagon's senior leadership. They allegedly admitted that the project involved a quote-unquote craft of unknown origin that was quote-unquote not made by human hands, and had remained virtually stagnant for decades due to the extreme difficulty of reverse engineering the technology. The encounter reportedly left Wilson furious, as he realized that the oversight, the most significant technology in human history, had been transferred entirely to a private aerospace entity operating beyond the reach of the United States government. For researchers tracking the 2026 scientist cluster, the Wilson Davis memo provides the essential bureaucratic blueprint for how such black projects are protected. It establishes the precedent of private sector immunity, where sensitive research, such as fusion breakthroughs or exotic materials, can be hidden within a corporate structure that's legally shielded from congressional or military inquiry or oversight. If the scientists currently disappearing are indeed part of these waived SAPs or special access programs, the memo serves as a warning that the truth may be buried in a black vault where even the director of the DIA is treated as an outsider. The document remains a cornerstone of the disclosure movement, for whatever that's worth, as it offers a rare intensified glimpse into the quote-unquote bigot list culture and the logistical mechanisms used to keep the most destabilizing secrets of research and investigation into anomalous phenomena and or technologies out of the public eye.
Whoosh.
And there's the SRI International Archives. These are early records of the remote viewing program that mentioned the specialized handlers for gifted operatives. So the hitchhiker effect also appears to possess a distinctive electronic signature, often targeting the digital infrastructure of the victim's life. In the case of the Witt family, W-I-T-T family, a defense contractor family linked to the OSAP investigations, the phenomenon manifested as the systematic bricking, quote-unquote bricking, of personal devices. Family members reported that their smartphones and laptops would frequently factory reset themselves. Hold on to that particular tidbit of knowledge right there, because it will come up again later. Or their devices will display strange, incomprehensible strings of code that IT experts were unable to trace back to any known malware. This was accompanied by poltergeist activity, where kitchen cabinets would fly open simultaneously or heavy furniture would be found rearranged in the morning. Investigators noted that these events often followed a specific 1.6 gigahertz frequency spike, suggesting that the hitchhiker effect may be a byproduct of a highly advanced form of tagging used by non-human intelligences to monitor those who have attempted to monitor them. The clinical dimensions of the hitchhiker effect reached its most harrowing peak with the case of a high-level military intelligence officer who, following a series of investigations into anomalous activity, discovered that the attachment had transitioned from a psychological nuisance to a lethal biological reality. This officer, after returning from a deployment to a high strangeness zone, began to experience the typical domestic disturbances, shadow figures and phantom footsteps, etc., that had come to define the post-encounter experience. However, the phenomena took a drastic dark turn when his wife, who had never visited the site and had no prior history of serious illness, was suddenly diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer that seemed to materialize overnight. The timing was so precise and the progression so rapid that it led program medical researchers to investigate whether the exposure had triggered some form of directed biological disruption. This case fueled the theory that the hitchhiker effect acts as a destructive force not only on the cognitive infrastructure of a household, but on the literal cellular integrity of those within it, effectively turning the family unit into a secondary casualty of the initial encounter. It should probably be stated that this potentially lethal biohazardous nature being attributed to such anomalous phenomena would and could, no doubt, be utilized as a justification for the prevention of civilian involvement with any further investigations of such high strangeness events and or locations. Just saying. This narrative of biological contagion is a cornerstone of the 2026 investigation into the Pasadena area cluster of missing or deceased scientists, as it suggests that the deaths and disappearances of scientists like Monica Jacinto Reza or Frank Maywald may be the final stage of a prolonged infection that begins in the field. For listeners who wish to bypass the sanitized official reports and examine the raw data themselves, these accounts are not merely fringe lore. They're documented in a series of rigorous, peer-reviewed, and whistleblower-led publications. The most essential primary source is the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, an insider's account of the secret government UFO program, written by Dr. James Lakatsky, Dr. Colm Kelleher, and investigative journalist George Knapp, which utilizes official Defense Intelligence Agency documentation to detail the Axelrod and Witt family incidents. Additionally, the 38 Defense Intelligence Reference Documents, or DIRDs, released via FOIA request, provides the technical and medical framework for how the government assessed the physiological damage and clinical symptoms, such as the cancer diagnosis mentioned above, linked to UAP proximity and the subsequent hitchhiker phenomenon. For those tracking the electronic and frequency-based aspects of the contagion, the ongoing data releases from Skinwalker Ranch, monitored by astrophysicist Dr. Travis Taylor, and the investigative journalism of Jeremy Corbell, offers a look at the specific 1.6 gigahertz frequency spikes that precede these domestic disturbances. Furthermore, the work of Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford University provides the neurological context, examining whether the hitchhiker effect targets specific regions of the brain like the caudate putamen, I think that's how you say it, to facilitate this bizarre two-way entanglement. These sources collectively demonstrate that while the hitchhiker effect may appear to be a ghost story, the paper trail leading back to the DIA and major defense contractors is very real, very dense, and deeply unsettling. The neurological foundation for this two-way entanglement finds its most rigorous expression in the work of the aforementioned Dr. Gary Nolan, a professor of pathology at Stanford University. Stanford again, and again and again. It should probably also be noted that Stanford University has roughly a century of involvement with studying the field of parapsychology. Just saying. Dr. Gary Nolan's expertise in genetics and immunology was repurposed by the intelligence community to solve a medical mystery. In the mid-2010s, Nolan was approached by individuals representing the agency, quote-unquote the agency, to examine a cohort of approximately 100 patients, mostly pilots, intelligence officers, and defense contractors, who had presented with a spectrum of brain injuries following encounters with UAP. While many of these cases exhibited damage similar to Havana syndrome, oddly enough, characterized by physical scarring or white matter hyperintensities, a significant subgroup revealed a peculiar anatomical anomaly that defied standard pathological classification. Nolan's research centered on the caudate putamen, structure deep within the basal ganglia responsible for integrating sensory information and motor control, but more importantly for high-level processing and the execution of complex intuition. In a majority of the symptomatic individuals who reported high strangeness or the hitchhiker effect, the caudate putamen was not damaged. Rather, it was hyperconnected and significantly larger than average. This region, which Nolan describes as the brain's antenna, quote-unquote the brain's antenna, appeared to have an increased density of neuronal wiring between the head of the caudate and the putamen. This leads to the provocative hypothesis that these individuals weren't just victims of an external force, but were neurologically tuned to a frequency that the average person simply cannot perceive. Additional side notes, there may also be some connection to recent advances and developments in the understanding of so-called plasma consciousness and its potential connections to the presence of plasma processing neurological microtubules within the human brain. However, this is merely speculation on my own part regarding certain fields of biophysics which I can scarcely comprehend. This anatomical discovery provides the mechanical framework for the hitchhiker phenomenon. Nolan suggests that this hyperconnection may function as a biological prerequisite for contact, acting as a transceiver that allows the observer to entangle with the anomaly. If the caudate putamen is indeed a receiver for non-local information, then the hitchhiker effect isn't a random haunting, but a data stream that follows the antenna home. For the defense community, this shifted the investigation from the craft in the sky to the biological hardware of the pilot. It raised the unsettling possibility that certain personnel, due to their unique neurology, are inherently leaky or quote-unquote leaky or predisposed to becoming conduits for fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare. So in this light, the pathological model of the hitchhiker effect is actually a story of biological compatibility, where the most brilliant minds in aerospace may be targeted not just for what they know, but for how their brains are physically constructed to interact with the unseen. For anyone interested in further research on this particular topic, once again, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon by Lakatsky, Kelleher, and Knapp. This is the definitive text on OSAP and the hitchhiker effect. There's the 38 DIRDs, quote-unquote DIRDs, the Defense Intelligence Reference Documents, specifically those focusing on clinical medical effects of anomalous aerospace subsystems, quote-unquote. The Hunt for the Skinwalker by Kelleher and Knapp, the foundational study of Skinwalker Ranch and early attachment reports. In Plain Sight, 2021 book by Ross Coulthart. This is investigative journalism linking high-level intelligence officers to these phenomena, and Dr. Gary Nolan's published research, analysis of the caudate putamen and UAP exposure in defense personnel. While the hitchhiker effect may sound like a ghost story from the digital age, within the corridors of the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, and the Pentagon, it was treated as a severe occupational health hazard. First codified during the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, aka OSAP, between 2008 and 2010. The hitchhiker effect refers to a phenomenon where the individual exposed to high strangeness or UAP encounters appears to bring something home, quote unquote, triggering a second wave of anomalous activity in their own residences that affects their families and social circles. Unlike a traditional UFO sighting, which is often a discrete, localized event, the hitchhiker effect operates like a pathogen or social contagion. The hitchhiker isn't a physical passenger, but a persistent shift in the witness's environment. The primary individual, often a military officer, physicist, or intelligence agent, undergoes a close-range encounter at a quote-unquote hotspot, most famously Skinwalker Ranch, or during a tactical UAP intercept. Upon returning home, often hundreds or thousands of miles away, the individual's family begins to experience the same phenomena. This suggests the effect is not tied to a location, but to the person. Defense personnel have officially reported shadow figures in their hallways, phantom footsteps, electronic devices being factory reset or bricked without any apparent cause, and the appearance of large, impossible animals, cryptids, or etc., on suburban properties. The most thoroughly documented cases involve highly vetted, quote-unquote, left-brained professionals whose testimony is difficult for the government to dismiss as hallucinations. As detailed in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, high-ranking intelligence officials visited investigative sites only to have their children later report tall, dark entities standing over their beds in Virginia and Maryland. Following the 2004 Tic Tac encounters, several personnel reported a spike in poltergeist-like activity in their homes. This has led researchers like Dr. Gary Nolan of Stanford University to examine the brains of these individuals, specifically their caudate putamen, to see if certain people are biologically predisposed or tuned to perceive or attract these events. A defense contractor's family, the aforementioned Witt family, W-I-T-T, reported a multi-year escalation of phenomena that began with simple orbs in the kitchen and ended with measurable electromagnetic spikes and physical injuries, such as bruises and unexplained marks on family members. The DIA's OSAP program did not view any of this as a spiritual matter, but as a potential asymmetrical threat. If a foreign adversary or non-human intelligence can infect a defense contractor with an effect that terrorizes their family, it becomes a powerful tool for extortion or psychological neutralization. Internal DIA documents and the 38 technical reports, the DIRDs, the DIRDs, commissioned by the program explore the clinical effects of UAP exposure. This includes damage to the central nervous system, symptoms mirroring Havana syndrome, and radiofrequency-induced internal scarring. Researchers at Skinwalker Ranch and government observers have repeatedly measured a 1.6 gigahertz signal preceding these hitchhiker events. This frequency is within the range used for satellite-to-Earth communication, leading to theories that the hitchhiker may be a targeted frequency-based tag or interdimensional malware, if you want to get really kooky about it. Government data suggests that the effect is more likely to take hold if the individual has a high baseline of certain neurological structures. This has turned the study of the hitchhiker effect into a quest for a biological signature of UAP contact. In the context of the recent mysterious deaths and disappearances of scientists, the hitchhiker effect is the ultimate tool of potential fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare if an engineer like, say, Monica Jacinto Reza or Nuno Loureiro were to catch a hitchhiker. Their ability to conduct high-level research would be compromised not only by a bullet, but by destabilization of their domestic reality. Federal investigators in 2026 are currently reviewing whether the digital wiping of phones, in the case of Melissa Cassius, which we'll get into in a moment, in the Melissa Cassius case, was a manual act or a symptom of a hitchhiker-style electronic scrubbing. By framing the phenomena as a contagion, the government has essentially moved the UAP topic out of the flying saucer department and into the biosecurity and psychological operations departments. As of late April 2026, the White House and the FBI have officially acknowledged a review into a cluster of cases involving at least 11 to 12 scientists and officials with ties to nuclear, aerospace, and advanced research programs. While local authorities initially treat many of these cases as isolated events, ranging from hiking accidents and suicides to random homicides, the House Oversight Committee has noted 3 specific commonalities that have triggered what they are referring to as the holistic review in regards to the overall interconnected investigations of these separate individuals. So the first is technical synergy. Almost every individual on this list worked in a niche field, such as metamaterials, plasma physics, or terahertz microwave systems. That's considered vital for the next generation of aerospace propulsion. Several cases involve specialists in advanced propulsion, including exotic or anti-gravity concepts, plasma physics, and classified aerospace programs. The second is institutional overlap. The concentration of cases centered around JPL or Caltech, Los Alamos, and MIT suggests a potential targeting of specific intellectual hubs. And then the third factor is the global brain drain idea. The investigation is now exploring whether similar patterns taking place right now, as we speak, over the course of the last several years, in both China and Brazil, indicate a coordinated effort to disrupt specific areas of global scientific research. Global scientific research. The Trump administration, via Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, or I guess former, I haven't been keeping abreast of that, but on April 17th, 2026, confirmed that the FBI and other federal agencies are conducting what they're now referring to as the holistic review to determine if these cases share more commonalities. So recent reports from late April also suggest similar concerns are rising regarding at least 9 scientists in China who worked in sensitive aerospace and nuclear sectors. And while skeptics point to patternicity, or the tendency to find meaning in random data, the level of clearance and the specific technical niches shared by these individuals have made this a priority for the House Oversight Committee. So what follows now is the list of the primary major individuals concerned with the cluster. Hopefully, I've included a decent balance of professional and personal that kind of paints a picture of these individuals as actual people, as opposed to cardboard cutouts of defense industry, caricatures. And hopefully this kind of helps elevate their position as actual human beings who were loved and appreciated by friends, family, and social circles around them. So, the list is as follows. All right, so first off, we've got William Neal McCaslin, retired Air Force Major General. Disappeared on February 27, 2026. Former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, or AFRL. He oversaw highly classified space and defense programs. His disappearance is considered the catalyst or trigger for the current federal review. Major General William Neal McCaslin is a retired United States Air Force officer and astronautical engineer whose career was defined by high-level oversight of the nation's most sensitive aerospace and space-based defense programs. Born into an Air Force family in 1957, McCaslin's trajectory was influenced early by the loss of his father in a flight accident, eventually leading him to the U.S. Air Force Academy, where he graduated in 1979. His academic prowess earned him a prestigious Hertz Foundation scholarship, allowing him to pursue both a master's and a PhD in astronautical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, focusing on control systems and orbital mechanics. Just to throw in a tidbit of information from Carla Turner, Dr. Carla Turner, UFO and abduction researcher, both hereditary and military or Air Force family members can be factors in recurrent and or hereditary abductions. So, just saying. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, McCaslin served in critical roles with the Office of Special Projects and the National Reconnaissance Office, or NRO. He was a key figure in the development of payload systems for satellite reconnaissance, often entrusted with leadership of classified units, typically reserved for much higher-ranking officers. His expertise bridged the gap between theoretical engineering and operational space warfare, leading to command roles at the Phillips Research Site and as vice commander of the Space and Missile Systems Center. By the mid-2000s, he had ascended to the Pentagon, serving as Director of Space Acquisition and Director of Special Programs, where he managed the integration of cutting-edge technology into the military's strategic framework. The pinnacle of his military career came in 2011 when he was named commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, the AFRL, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In this capacity, McCaslin managed a $4.4 billion portfolio and a workforce of 10,000, overseeing the Air Force's entire science and technology program. This included the Office of Scientific Research and the 711th Human Performance Wing. His tenure at AFRL placed him at the heart of the U.S. military's most advanced research, from directed energy weapons to hypersonic flight. So to anyone wondering, yes, this is essentially confirmation of the existence of, or at the very least, theoretical existence of, working directed energy weapons. Following his retirement in 2013, McCaslin transitioned to the private sector as Director of Technology at Applied Technology Associates, a subsidiary of Blue Halo. Blue Halo is a defense technology firm specializing in, or a synonym for, advanced AI-driven solutions for national security, specifically in counter-drone systems, space superiority, directed energy weapons or defenses, and cyber intelligence, while also serving on the boards of organizations like Riverside Research. However, his post-retirement life drew significant curiosity due to his brief unpaid consultancy with Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, TTSA. While his wife characterized this as an effort to lend scientific accuracy to fictional projects, leaked emails from 2016 suggest McCaslin was viewed by enthusiasts as a knowledgeable insider regarding government research into unidentified anomalous phenomena. And the distinction matters there. UAP, yes, but the broader framework of unidentified anomalous phenomena as opposed to aerial phenomena. McCaslin vanished from his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico on February 27th, 2026. Somewhat chillingly, he left behind his phone, prescription glasses, and smartwatch, items essential for his daily life. But he was noted to have his wallet. He was wearing hiking boots, and he took with him a .38 caliber revolver, were missing from his home. Despite a massive search effort and the issuance of a silver alert, no sign of the 68-year-old general has been found. His disappearance has become the centerpiece, or once again, the catalyst of the wider investigation into the recent cluster of missing and deceased scientists, prompting an official holistic review by the FBI and the House Oversight Committee. Next up, we've got Monica Jacinto Reza, associated with Aerojet Rocketdyne. She vanished on June 22nd, 2025, while hiking near Mount Waterman, California. She was a senior aerospace engineer and technical fellow specializing in advanced rocket propulsion materials. Reza is a prominent American metallurgist and materials engineer whose professional achievements paved the way for modern high-performance rocket engines. Born in 1966, according to most sources at least, Reza pursued her education at Columbia University, earning a Bachelor of Science in Metallurgical Engineering, followed by a Master of Science in Materials Engineering from UCLA in 1997. Her career began at Rocketdyne in 1988, where she tackled the complex challenge of oxygen-rich staged combustion, a design traditionally avoided due to the tendency of high-pressure oxygen to destroy engine components. In the mid-1990s, Reza co-invented Mondalloy, a revolutionary nickel-based superalloy, alongside Australian metallurgist Dallas Hardwick, another missing individual we'll get into momentarily. This material was a breakthrough in aerospace engineering, as it could withstand extreme temperatures and pressures without requiring protective coatings. The invention allowed for lighter and more reliable rocket components and was eventually integrated into approximately 12 parts of the AR-1 engine and the hydrocarbon boost technology demonstrator. Her work was so significant that it led to 3 patents and earned her the inaugural Luminary Award from HENAAC, H-E-N-A-A-C, which is the Hispanic Engineer National Achievement Awards Corporation, in 2004 for her technical contributions and mentorship. By 2025, Reza had risen to the position of Director of Materials Processing at NASA's JPL in Pasadena. Her professional history overlaps directly with that of Major General William Neal McCasland. While he was in the Air Force, McCasland oversaw the very cost-sharing programs with the Air Force Research Laboratory, AFRL, that helped scale up and refine Reza's work on Mongoloid. Reza vanished on June 22nd, 2025, under highly unusual circumstances. He was hiking in the Mount Waterman Trail in the Angeles National Forest with 2 experienced companions. Around 9:10 a.m., her hiking partner, who was only about 30 feet ahead of her, turned around to check on her. She smiled and waved, indicating she was fine. However, when he looked back just moments later, she had completely disappeared. Despite an exhaustive months-long search involving helicopters, search dogs, radar, and federal assets, no trace of Reza or her gear has ever been found. Her case is now a primary focus of the federal holistic view into the cluster of missing and deceased aerospace researchers. The disappearance of Monica Jacinto Reza on the Mount Waterman Trail presents a profile that is almost surgically identical to most of the high strangeness cases documented within the Missing 411 narrative. Formulated by investigator David Paulides, the Missing 411 criteria identify a specific set of anomalies that recur in vanishings within national parks and forests, anomalies that defy standard search and rescue logic. Reza's case checks nearly every primary cluster marker. The point of separation occurred in a split-second window while she was in the presence of companions. The disappearance happened in a high-elevation, boulder-strewn granite environment, and most significantly, there was a total absence of scent trails for tracking dogs or physical debris, despite her being only 30 feet away from help. Generally, in situations like this where scent tracking dogs hit a dead end, it usually tends to indicate that a person has gotten into a vehicle. At least, that's the common operating logic. As far as high strangeness goes, this overlap suggests that Reza may have encountered a liminal or threshold event common to these unexplained disappearances. In Missing 411 lore, victims often vanish in silent zones, where the local environment suddenly becomes unnaturally quiet, a phenomenon witnesses sometimes call the Oz effect, as it was dubbed by writer and researcher Jenny Randles. For an aerospace researcher of Reza's caliber, this geographical anomaly takes on a darker technical hue. We apply the hitchhiker effect, or hyperdimensional physics, which we'll discuss a little bit later down the road. If we apply these frameworks, her disappearance in the Angeles National Forest, a region long associated with both exotic defense testing and high strangeness sightings, may not have been a simple hiking accident. Instead, it mirrors the transdimensional extraction theories where individuals are pulled from the physical plane through localized frequency shifts. The fact that Reza vanished in a now you see her, now you don't fashion with no gear or footprints left behind places her case at the terrifying intersection of natural anomaly and potential fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare, where the battlefield is a literal tear in the fabric of the familiar landscape. Although, once again, to bring things back down to the ground, it's likely she entered a vehicle, whether willingly or otherwise. Next up, we've got Melissa Cassius, associated with Los Alamos National Laboratory. Last seen June 26, 2025 in New Mexico. She was an administrative professional in a high-security ecosystem. Notably, her phones were found wiped clean after her disappearance. Melissa Cassius is a 53-year-old administrative professional who worked for many years at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, or LANL, in New Mexico. While her case has been drawn into the wider investigation of missing researchers, her family and public records clarify that her role was administrative rather than scientific, and she didn't hold high-level security clearance. At Los Alamos, she and her husband, Mark, both worked and commuted together daily from their home in Ranchos de Taos. The circumstances of her disappearance on June 26, 2025 are particularly puzzling. That morning, after dropping off her husband at work and passing through the laboratory's security herself, she unexpectedly returned home, later telling her husband that she'd forgotten her badge. She spent the morning running errands and dropped off lunch for her daughter at around 12:45 p.m., and she was last seen on surveillance footage at approximately 2:20 p.m. walking alone along State Road 518 in Talpa, New Mexico, wearing a backpack and walking, quote-unquote, briskly. When her daughter returned home that evening, she found several disturbing anomalies. Melissa's purse, keys, and wallet were all left inside the house. 2 of her personal cell phones were recovered in the home, and both had been wiped to factory settings. And investigators reportedly found muddy boots and traces of blood in the bedroom, though the sources and context of the blood have not been publicly detailed. Following her disappearance, a divide emerged regarding the motive. Her husband and the New Mexico State Police initially suggested that the disappearance may have been of her own volition, citing a quote-unquote huge amount of stress related to personal financial issues. However, her parents and siblings have strongly disputed this, maintaining that her behavior was entirely out of character and that the factory reset phones and abandoned car keys point towards a potentially more sinister event. Despite exhaustive searches in the Taos County area and the recovery of abandoned clothes along the roadside, no trace of Melissa Cassius has been found. Her inclusion in the current federal holistic review stems from her long-term employment at one of the nation's most sensitive nuclear research facilities and the proximity of her disappearance to those of other defense-linked professionals in the region. Next, we've got Anthony Chavez, associated also with Los Alamos National Laboratory. He disappeared May 4th, 2025, while walking in New Mexico. He was a former employee of the lab. Anthony Chavez is a 78-year-old former employee of the Los Alamos National Laboratory whose disappearance in early May 2025 has become a significant component of the ongoing federal investigation into missing defense and aerospace personnel. Described as 5'6", approximately 135 pounds, often wearing glasses, Chavez spent much of his career and retirement in the tight-knit scientific community of Los Alamos, New Mexico. Unlike some of the high-profile scientists in this cluster, Chavez's specific technical role at the laboratory during his tenure has remained largely shielded from public disclosure, though he's consistently identified as a professional associated with the facility. Los Alamos is the primary site for the design and maintenance of the United States nuclear arsenal, and the laboratory's workforce is naturally categorized by a high level of institutional trust and historical clearance. The timeline of his disappearance began on May 4th, 2025, when he was last seen in Los Alamos. He was officially reported missing on May 8th, and the Los Alamos Police Department, aka the relatively better LAPD, issued an urgent plea for public assistance on May 12th. His family and friends have emphasized that his disappearance was entirely out of character, noting that he had no history of wandering or unannounced departures. The search for Chavez has been exhaustive, involving officers and volunteers that have scoured local hiking trails and wilderness areas surrounding the town. The Los Alamos PD and federal investigators have reviewed hours of footage from local businesses and security checkpoints within the restricted laboratory zone. And due to his connection to Los Alamos National Laboratories, the investigation moved beyond local law enforcement to include coordinated efforts with multiple state and federal agencies. Despite these efforts, no physical evidence, no clothing, personal items, or vehicle has ever been recovered. His case is frequently grouped with that of Melissa Cassius, another previously mentioned Los Alamos professional who disappeared just 1 month later in June 2025. Proximity of these two vanishings within a single high-security town has led the FBI and the House Oversight Committee to include Chavez in their current holistic review. Investigators are particularly focused on whether Chavez's past work or internal access at the lab provided any provides any connective tissue to the other aerospace and materials science experts currently missing from the American defense ecosystem. So those are the ones that are missing. I think there's a couple more that are specifically missing, but those are the primary ones. So these following are the suspicious or unexplained deaths. First, we've got Carl Grillmeyer, associated with Caltech and NASA. He died on February 16, 2026. He was a renowned astrophysicist known for his work on stellar streams and asteroid tracking. He was killed at his home. While a suspect was arrested, the case is frequently cited due to his proximity to other high-profile researchers. Carl Grillmeyer was a distinguished Canadian-American astrophysicist whose 3-decade career at Caltech significantly advanced our understanding of the Milky Way's history and the composition of distant worlds. Born in Calgary, Alberta in 1959, Grillmeyer developed an early passion for astronomy that led him to earn a PhD from the Australian National University in 1993. By 1997, he had joined the Infrared Processing and Analysis Center, or IPAC, at Caltech, where he became a foundational figure in NASA's most ambitious space telescope missions. Grillmeyer's scientific legacy is anchored in his detective work regarding galactic structures. He was a pioneer in the study of stellar streams, or curvilinear trails of stars left behind by ancient globular clusters or dwarf galaxies as they were torn apart and absorbed by the Milky Way. He discovered dozens of these streams, often naming them after mythological rivers of the underworld such as Lethe, Acheron, and Styx. Beyond our galaxy, he achieved a historic milestone in 2007 as the lead author of a study that, for the first time ever, captured enough infrared light from an exoplanet to identify molecules in its atmosphere, detecting signs of water vapor on a planet orbiting a distant star. In his final years, Grillmeyer's work turned toward planetary defense systems and the detection of near-Earth objects. He served as a calibration scientist for NASA's NEOWISE mission, which hunts for potentially hazardous asteroids and comets, and was a specialist for the upcoming Near-Earth Object Surveyor, or NEO-Surveyor mission. At the time of his death, he was also developing new instrumentation at the Palomar Observatory to monitor meteor impacts on the moon. Grillmeyer was fatally shot on the front porch of his home in Llano, California, at approximately 6:10 a.m. on February 16, 2026. Paramedics pronounced the 67-year-old dead at the scene from a single gunshot wound to the torso. Law enforcement eventually arrested a 29-year-old suspect who was charged with murder and carjacking. While the suspect had a history of trespassing on the Grillmeyer property, leading the scientist's widow to describe the event as a tragic, quote, misguided revenge plot, unquote, timing and nature of the killing have drawn intense federal scrutiny. Now, at the risk of seeming insensitive, I just want to preface the following info with a disclaimer that I'm simply considering the events surrounding Grillmeyer's murder from a purely hypothetical framework, and I mean no disrespect to the man or his family by pursuing this particular line of questioning. However, the relationship between Grillmeyer and his assailant, when stripped of its random crime veneer, reveals a pattern of persistent, targeted harassment that mirrors the slow-burn psychological attrition seen in other fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare tactics. The suspect's history of trespassing was not merely a series of isolated incidents. It was a sustained intrusion into Grillmeyer's private sanctuary, creating a state of perpetual hypervigilance that serves as the domestic equivalent of a siege. In the context of the recent scientist cluster, federal investigators are examining whether such, quote, misguided revenge plots, unquote, are in fact orchestrated outcomes. By identifying and subtly radicalizing or directing an unstable individual toward a specific target, an adversary can achieve a direct, violent result while maintaining total plausible deniability. These direct, violent results in this context are often referred to as kinetic result. The assailant, in this case, functions as the ultimate asymmetrical weapon, a low-tech, high-impact asset whose pre-existing grievances provide a ready-made narrative for local law enforcement, effectively cloaking a strategic assassination as a tragic, localized dispute. The suspicion around Grillmeyer's death is further amplified by the specific nature of his residence in Llano, a remote, high-desert location situated on the literal and figurative edge of the Antelope Valley Aerospace Corridor. Grillmare was not just a retired astronomer. He was a gatekeeper of subsurface detection and celestial mechanics who lived in the shadow of the very facilities, i.e., Edwards Air Force Base and Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, where the secret space program's most sensitive hardware is developed. Allegedly. The timing of the shooting, occurring at the break of dawn on his own front porch, suggests a level of premeditation and surveillance that exceeds the typical profile of a random carjacker or regular carjacker. In regards to any potential intelligence apparatus actions connected to the cluster of these mysterious deaths and disappearances, Grillmare's death carries the signature of a quote-unquote final scrub, the removal of a veteran mind who possessed the institutional memory of decades of orbital anomalies. By framing the killings as a domestic tragedy, the architect of the event ensures that the public cognitive infrastructure remains focused on quote-unquote lone wolf violence. While the true loss, the silencing of a man who could see what others could not, is quietly filed away as a solved crime. Because of his proximity to sensitive NASA research and the broader pattern of violence affecting the aerospace community, the FBI and the White House have included Grillmare's case in their ongoing holistic review. Investigators are currently examining whether his specific expertise in tracking celestial objects and his high-level institutional ties at Caltech and JPL connect him to other scientists who have disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances over the past year. Next up, we've got Nuno Loureiro, associated with MIT. Died on December 16th, 2025, after being shot the previous day. He was the director of the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center and a global expert in fusion energy. Nuno Loureiro was a world-renowned theoretical plasma physicist and fusion scientist who served as the director of the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center, or PSFC. He was born in Viseu, Portugal in 1977, where Loureiro demonstrated a singular focus on science from a very young age. He earned his undergraduate and master's degrees in physics from the Instituto Superior Técnico, or IST, in Lisbon, Spain in 2000, followed by a PhD from Imperial College London in 2005. His doctoral work on tearing modes in plasma laid the groundwork for a career dedicated to solving the complex physics of magnetic reconnection, a process critical to understanding both solar flares and the containment of superheated fuel in fusion reactors. Loureiro's professional path was a steady ascent through the world's most prestigious research institutions. After postdoctoral fellowships at the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory and the Ukiah Culham Center for Fusion Energy, that's UKAEA, Culham Center for Fusion Energy, he returned to Portugal in 2009 to lead the theory and modeling group at the Institute for Plasma and Nuclear Fusion. In 2016, he joined the faculty at MIT, where his meteoric rise saw him become a full professor by 2021, and the director of the PSFC, which is MIT's largest laboratory, in May of 2024. At the time of his death, he was the Herman Feshbach Professor of Physics and had recently been honored by President Joe Biden with the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, the highest U.S. government honor for young researchers. Loureiro was fatally shot at his residence in Brookline, Massachusetts, on the evening of December 15, 2025. Neighbors reported hearing 3 loud bangs, and Loureiro was transported to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead the following morning. The investigation quickly shifted from a local homicide to a high-profile, multi-state inquiry when ballistics and a rental car linked the murder to Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, a former graduate student who had carried out a mass shooting at Brown University just 2 days prior. Valente, who attended the University of Lisbon alongside Loureiro in the late 1990s, was later found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in a New Hampshire storage unit. While the primary hypothesis from investigators points to a motive of personal resentment, contrasting Loureiro's brilliant academic success with Valente's own stalled career, the murder has become a focal point for wider federal scrutiny. Loureiro's work on fusion energy and plasma turbulence represented a potential paradigm shift in clean energy technology, and his death occurred within a week of him presenting his research in Washington, D.C. As a result, the FBI and the House Oversight Committee have included Loureiro in the April 2026 Holistic Review of Scientists with Access to Sensitive U.S. Nuclear and Aerospace Technology who've died or vanished under unusual circumstances. The tragic intersection of Nuno Loureiro's brilliance and Claudio Valente's violence brings to the fore a chilling concept within the study of fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare, and this goes for the aforementioned Carl Grillmer as well. That's the idea of the camouflaged assassination. This theory posits that what the public perceives as a spontaneous, random, quote-unquote, random mass shooting may, in specific instances, serve as a sophisticated delivery mechanism for a targeted hit. By embedding a high-value assassination within a larger burst of public chaos, an architect of such violence can achieve several strategic objectives simultaneously. First, the noise of a mass casualty event provides immediate tactical cover, making it nearly impossible for witnesses or initial responders to identify a specific singular target. Second, the sheer scale of the horror ensures that the subsequent investigation is funneled through the lens of public safety and mental health rather than counterintelligence or state-sponsored sabotage. In this framework, the perpetrator becomes a disposable asset. A person whose pre-existing instability is weaponized to ensure that the primary objective is achieved while leaving the true motive buried under the weight of a societal tragedy. This strategy of hiding a leaf in the forest, so to speak, relies heavily on the predictable patterns of the modern media apparatus, which notoriously prioritizes the pathology of the perpetrator over the legacy of the victims. When a mass shooting occurs, the news cycle is almost immediately dominated by a forensic autopsy of the killer's life, their manifestos, their digital footprint, and their perceived grievances. This obsessive focus creates a media feedback loop that grants the murderer a perverse form of immortality, while effectively erasing the victims as distinct individuals. In the case of Nuno Loureiro, the media's fixation on Valente's failed academic career and his cross-state rampage risked reducing a world-class physicist to a mere footnote in a madman's narrative. This represents a gross oversight of the lives lost. It ignores the reality that every victim in these quote-unquote random events is a repository of untapped potential, a collection of pre-existing accomplishments and future gifts to civilization that are snuffed out in an instant. The loss of a mind like Loureiro's, indeed, all of the individuals at the center of these recent events, isn't just a personal tragedy for his family or a professional loss for MIT. It's a measurable blow to the advancement of human civilization at large. When a scientist on the verge of a fusion breakthrough is taken out in a hail of gunfire, the potential gift or contribution that they were preparing to give the world, i.e., in this case, potentially clean, limitless energy, for example, is delayed or perhaps even lost forever. By failing to center the victims, the media inadvertently aids the perpetrators of asymmetrical warfare by helping to scramble the data. If we don't look at who was lost, we can't see the patterns of why they were lost. The injustice of these incidents is compounded when the public is fed a diet of the killer's motives, quote-unquote motives, while the specific brilliance of the victims is allowed to fade into the background. For all of us, the task at hand is to resist this narrative gravity, to look past the quote-unquote randomness of the burst of violence and recognize that in the cold logistical calculus of global conflict, the most effective way to kill an idea is to hide the assassination of its author with the chaos of a seemingly random tragedy. Now, having said that, it is also indeed necessary to look into the perpetrator's background, if for no other reason than to assure that the right questions are being asked. In the case of Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, the surface-level narrative presented by local authorities focused heavily on a quote-unquote stalled academic career and a simmering resentment toward his former peer, Nuno Loureiro. Valente, who had shared a classroom with Loureiro at the University of Lisbon in the late 1990s, reportedly felt that his own contributions to the field of plasma physics had been sidelined while Loureiro ascended to the heights of MIT and international acclaim. This quote-unquote professional envy as a motive is a staple of domestic crime reporting, but when viewed through the lens of specialized investigative protocols, Valente's trajectory suggests a more complex psychological and operational profile. Investigators are currently scrutinizing Valente's activities during his years in the United Kingdom and Portugal, particularly any contact that he may have had with foreign intelligence services or scientific clusters known for aggressive talent poaching. Of specific interest is whether Valente was subjected to any form of ideological grooming, or if his psychological instability was identified and quietly cultivated by a potential external actor. The logistical precision of his 2-day multi-state rampage, moving from a mass shooting at Brown University to a targeted execution in Brookline, Massachusetts, followed by a tactical retreat to a New Hampshire storage unit where he would die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, indicates a level of planning and resource management that often exceeds the capabilities of a typical lone wolf actor or random mass shooter. Federal reviews are examining his digital communications for any evidence of quote-unquote stochastic signaling, where an unstable individual is nudged toward a specific target through a series of subtle indirect prompts that leave the orchestrator with total plausible deniability. Furthermore, the inquiry into Valente's background is looking for signs of unwitting involvement with intelligence apparatuses, such as participation in seemingly benign psychological studies or quote-unquote resilience training programs that may have served as a cover for more intrusive behavioral conditioning. Think Ted Kaczynski and MKUltra. The question at the center of the FBI's holistic review is whether Valente was a primary actor driven by personal spite or a kinetic delivery system whose pre-existing grievances were weaponized to remove a strategic asset like Loureiro from the global board. By analyzing Valente's travel records and financial ties to defense-linked academic institutions, researchers hope to determine if he was quote-unquote tagged as a potential disruptor years before the event. If a link is found, it would shift the Loureiro case from a tragic murder-suicide to a confirmed instance of intelligence apparatus involvement, where the perpetrator is as much a casualty of the scrambled data as the victim himself. Although keep in mind, this does not absolve him of his actions in any way. Next up is Amy Eskridge, associated with the Institute for Exotic Science. Recently added to the federal review list, Eskridge was the president of the Institute for Exotic Science and worked on anti-gravity and electrostatic propulsion systems. Her death was ruled a suicide, but it remains a focal point for those investigating the cluster. Amy Eskridge was a polymathic researcher and entrepreneur based in Huntsville, Alabama, whose work focused on the frontiers of propulsion and material science. Born in 1987 in the Rocket City, she was the daughter of a former NASA engineer and developed a lifelong obsession with the cosmos. A graduate of the University of Alabama in Huntsville with a double major in chemistry and biology, she was described by peers and family as a genius interdisciplinarian who mastered fields ranging from electrical engineering and physics to genetic engineering and nanotechnology. In Huntsville, Eskridge co-founded and served as president of the Institute for Exotic Science. Her primary research focused on quote-unquote gravity modification, specifically exploring anti-gravity propulsion and electrostatic propulsion systems. Her objective was to challenge conventional physics to find more efficient ways for humanity to travel through space. Because of her specialized focus on exotic technologies, she became a well-known figure in the fringe science and ufology communities, often participating in interviews where she discussed the difficulties of bringing paradigm-shifting technology to the public. The circumstances surrounding her death on June 11, 2022, have become a flashpoint for the current federal investigation. Eskridge died at the age of 34 from an apparently self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head at her home in Alabama. Local authorities and her own family, including her father, Richard Eskridge, have consistently maintained that her death was a suicide resulting from a long struggle with chronic pain. Her family recently issued public statements rejecting conspiratorial suspicions, stating that scientists are subject to the same personal tragedies as anyone else. However, interest in her case was revived in April 2026 when investigative reports highlighted several anomalies. In 2020, Eskridge reportedly recorded herself discussing, quote, harassments, threats, unquote, and the sabotage of her research. In one video, she pointed to burns on her hands that she claimed were caused by a, quote, guided energy weapon, unquote. Frank Milburn, a former British intelligence officer, recently shared alleged text messages from Eskridge in which she purportedly warned him, quote, if you see any report that I killed myself, I most definitely did not, unquote. Despite her death occurring 4 years ago, the FBI and House Oversight Committee have retroactively added her to the official list of scientists under the Holistic Review mandate. Investigators are looking for any connective tissue between her work on anti-gravity and the research of other missing or deceased individuals in the cluster, such as Monica Jacinto Reza and Nuno Loureiro. While her family seeks to let her rest in peace, obviously her role as an advocate for exotic science has made her a central figure in the debate over whether specialized aerospace researchers are being systematically targeted. Next up, we've got Jason Thomas, associated with Novartis. He disappeared on December 12, 2025. He was the assistant director of chemical biology at Novartis, and his body was recovered from a lake on March 17, 2026. Jason R. Thomas was a highly accomplished biophysicist and a key figure in the pharmaceutical research community, specifically within the Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research. Born in 1980 in Savannah, Georgia, Thomas grew up in a military family, spending his early years traveling before settling in New Jersey. His academic path was marked by an intense curiosity and a drive to bridge disparate scientific disciplines, leading him to earn dual undergraduate degrees in physics and biology from Temple University. Thomas continued his specialization by obtaining a doctorate in biophysics from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He further refined his expertise through a postdoctoral program at the world-renowned Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, California. Demonstrating a restless intellectual appetite, he even pursued a degree in patent law during his spare time, not for professional transition, but to better understand the legal framework surrounding scientific innovation. In 2010, Thomas joined Novartis in Massachusetts, where he eventually rose to the position of Associate Director of Chemical Biology. His work sat at the intersection of life sciences and physical principles, focusing on how chemical tools can be used to probe and manipulate biological systems to develop new therapeutics. To those who knew him personally, he was described as a compassionate mentor and a partner in every sense. Known in his neighborhood for elaborate holiday light displays and a deep love for the outdoors, often seen hiking or walking with his dogs. The circumstances of his death are among the most cited in the current federal inquiry. Thomas disappeared on December 12, 2025. His disappearance followed a period of immense personal loss, as both of his parents had passed away just 1 month prior in November of 2025. After a search that lasted over 3 months, his body was recovered from Lake Quannapowitt in Wakefield, Massachusetts on March 17, 2026. While the Middlesex County Medical Examiner's Office stated that no foul play was suspected, and his family noted that he'd been struggling with depression following the death of his parents, his inclusion in the FBI's Holistic Review stems from his high-level position at a global leader in biomedical research. Investigators are examining whether the expertise of chemical biologists like Thomas connects to the work of other scientists within the cluster, particularly those specializing in the biological effects of advanced technologies or sensitive material interactions. Next up is Frank Mywald, associated with NASA and JPL, a scientist with decades of experience at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, whose name has recently been included in investigative lists regarding this pattern of deaths and disappearances. Frank Warner Mywald was a highly specialized physicist and engineer at NASA's JPL, whose work focused on the cutting edge of microwave technology and far infrared spectroscopy. A German-born scientist who made Los Angeles his long-term home, Maiwald spent decades developing the sensitive instruments that allow NASA to peer into the deepest reaches of the cosmos and the interior structures of distant moons. Maiwald's technical expertise was centered on terahertz technology and advanced frequency synthesizers. He was a key figure in the development of power amplifiers and cascaded frequency triplers, which are essential for creating continuous wave coherent sources at extremely high frequencies. His research facilitated the detection of specific molecular ions in massive star-forming regions like the Orion-Kleiman Low Nebula, helping astronomers understand the chemical evolution of the universe. At JPL, he was instrumental in the Herschel heterodyne instrument for the far infrared, also known as HiFi, and the development of the Surface Biology and Geology VSWIR instrument. He also managed the delivery of critical instruments for the AMRC program, which monitors sea surface levels and water vapor for Earth science missions. Beyond the stars, Maiwald's work had direct applications for planetary exploration. He co-authored research on interferometric reflectometer methods designed to passively detect subsurface oceans and liquid water on the icy moons of Jupiter using the planet's own radio emissions. His career was defined by this ability to build hardware that could survive and function in the most extreme environments known to science, from the cold vacuum of space to the high radiation neighborhoods of gas giants. The circumstances surrounding Maiwald's death have contributed to the current federal investigation into the quote-unquote Pasadena area cluster. He died on July 4th, 2024, in Los Angeles at the age of 61. Despite his high-profile role at JPL and the sensitive nature of the aerospace technology he managed, no public cause of death was ever disclosed, and reports indicate that no autopsy was performed. His death is now viewed by the FBI and House Oversight Committee as one of the earliest data points in a pattern that includes his JPL colleagues Monica Jacinto Reza and Michael David Hicks. Investigators are looking into whether Maiwald's deep knowledge of microwave systems and satellite instrumentation made him part of the same national security concern currently being reviewed by the White House. Next up, the aforementioned Michael David Hicks, associated with NASA and JPL. He died on July 30th, 2023. A senior research scientist at JPL, Hicks specialized in asteroid deflection and comet studies. Like Frank Maiwald, another JPL scientist on this list, his cause of death was not publicly disclosed, which has led investigative researchers to group them together as part of a potential pattern affecting JPL personnel. Michael David Hicks was a veteran planetary scientist who dedicated nearly 25 years to the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where he became a cornerstone of the world's asteroid tracking and planetary defense capabilities. Born in Dayton, Ohio in 1964, Hicks was a highly educated researcher, earning his undergraduate and master's degrees from Boston University before completing his PhD in lunar and planetary science at the University of Arizona in 1997. His dissertation, a spectrophotometric survey of comets and Earth-approaching asteroids, signaled the beginning of a career focused on the physical properties of near-Earth objects. Joining JPL in 1998, Hicks established himself as a prolific scientist, authoring over 80 peer-reviewed papers. He was a central figure on several of NASA's most high-profile missions, including the DART project, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, which successfully demonstrated humanity's ability to deflect an asteroid, something I'm very glad to hear about. The Dawn mission, a landmark study of the protoplanets Vesta and Ceres. NEAT, or Near-Earth Asteroid Tracking, a long-running program designed to detect objects that could pose a threat to Earth. And Deep Space One, NASA's first mission to test ion propulsion and navigate autonomously using an onboard camera. Outside of his rigorous scientific output, Hicks was a man of diverse creative interests. He was a skilled artist, known for woodblock prints, oil paintings, and metalwork. He was also a regular performer at the Mount Palomar Observatory, where he would play the ukulele during observing runs. bridging the gap between cold, calculated data and very human artistic expression. Hicks passed away on July 30th, 2023, at the age of 59. At the time, his death was handled as a private matter. His family chose not to disclose the official cause of death, though his daughter, Julia, later stated that he had been managing an unspecified chronic medical condition. However, by April 2026, Hicks was retroactively identified by federal investigators as the first significant entry in the cluster of suspicious losses affecting the aerospace community. His inclusion into the FBI's holistic review stems from several factors that caught the attention of the House Oversight Committee. His work on asteroid deflection and ion propulsion, the aforementioned Deep Space One, overlaps with the advanced aerospace themes seen in later cases like those of Monica Jacinto Reza and Amy Eskridge. His death in 2023 preceded a wave of disappearances at JPL and Los Alamos, leading analysts to question if his passing marked the start of a targeted brain drain of key NASA personnel. The lack of a public autopsy or cause of death, similar to the case of his colleague Frank Maywald, has fueled the committee's drive to verify whether these deaths were truly natural or part of a broader security breach. While his family has expressed deep distress over his name being linked to conspiracy theories, the federal government's current stance is that the level of institutional expertise held by Hicks necessitates a second look to ensure no external actors were involved in the attrition of America's leading aerospace minds. Next up is Stephen Garcia, associated with the Kansas City National Security Campus. He's been missing since August 28, 2025. While not a scientist in the academic sense, he worked at a major Department of Energy facility managed by Honeywell that focuses on the non-nuclear components of nuclear weapons. His disappearance is cited in the House Oversight Committee's inquiry due to his high-level access to sensitive logistics and secure facility data. Garcia is a 48-year-old government contractor whose disappearance in August 2025 has become a central focus of the holistic review by the FBI and House Oversight Committee. While he wasn't a theoretical scientist, his professional role granted him significant access to one of the most sensitive hubs in the American nuclear defense infrastructure. Garcia was a contract property custodian at the Kansas City National Security Campus, also known as the KCNSC. This facility, managed by Honeywell Federal Manufacturing and Technologies for the National Nuclear Security Administration, is a high-security site responsible for producing or procuring 85% of the non-nuclear components for the United States nuclear arsenal. As a property custodian, Garcia's role involved management and tracking of critical equipment and materials required for the production of sensitive defense components. Because of his proximity to restricted blueprints and logistics for nuclear weapon components, Garcia held a high-level security clearance and was subject to rigorous government vetting. His work was essential for ensuring that the supply chain for the nation's nuclear deterrent remained secure and functional. Garcia vanished on August 28, 2025 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The circumstances of his departure mirror many of the digital anomalies seen in the McCasland and Cassius cases. He left his Albuquerque home on foot around 9 a.m., carrying a handgun. However, he left behind his cell phone, wallet, keys, and car. While some early reports suggest potential mental health struggles, anonymous sources close to the case and Garcia's family have strongly pushed back against claims that he was suicidal or experiencing a mental health crisis. His disappearance occurred in the same city where Major General William Neal McCasland would later vanish in February of 2026. The House Oversight Committee has specifically cited Garcia's disappearance as a reason for their multi-agency inquiry. Investigators are exploring several critical questions. Did Garcia's role give him insight into the transport or storage of exotic materials that overlap with the research of scientists like Monica Jacinto Reza? Given that he lived in Albuquerque, investigators are looking for social or professional connective tissue between Garcia and the personnel at nearby Los Alamos National Laboratory, such as Anthony Chavez and Melissa Cassius. Analysts are questioning whether individuals like Garcia, who manage the physical assets of secret programs, are being targeted alongside the scientists who designed them. Despite extensive searches and his inclusion in the FBI's National Missing Persons Database, no trace of Steven Garcia has been found. His case remains a primary driver for the current congressional push to determine if a foreign or domestic actor is systematically harvesting individuals with high-level access to the U.S. nuclear and aerospace supply chain. Next is Dallas Hardwick, who's associated with materials science and aerospace in general. She was a trailblazing physicist and metallurgy expert. Though she died in 2015, her name has resurfaced in April of 2026 reports because her research into superalloys and advanced nickel-based materials directly overlaps with the work of the currently missing Monica Jacinto Reza. Investigators are looking at her older patents to see if they form the foundation for the exotic propulsion technologies currently at the center of the probe. Dallas Hardwick was a trailblazing Australian metallurgist and physicist whose foundational work in high-performance materials created the literal framework for modern rocket propulsion. Born in 1950, Hardwick was a pioneer for women in heavy industry, becoming the first woman to earn a doctorate in metallurgy from the University of New South Wales in Australia. Her early career was marked by a rigorous focus on the molecular behavior of metals under extreme stress, an expertise that eventually brought her to the United States to work at the Rockwell Science Center in Thousand Oaks, California. At Rockwell, Hardwick became a mentor and primary collaborator to a young Monica Jacinto Reza. Together, they tackled one of the quote-unquote holy grails of aerospace engineering, developing a metal that could survive the inferno of an oxygen-rich staged combustion rocket engine without melting or catching fire. In the mid-1990s, their partnership resulted in the invention of the previously mentioned Mondaloid, a name famously derived from combining Monica and Dallas. This nickel-based superalloy was designed to be burn-resistant at pressures exceeding 4,000 psi, a feat previously thought impossible for structural engine components. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Hardwick's research was the recipient of significant strategic interest. Her work on Mondaloid and other superalloys was scaled up through cost-sharing programs with the Air Force Research Laboratory, the previously mentioned AFRL, as well as NASA. This period of her career created the direct funding chain that federal investigators are now scrutinizing, as the programs she and Reza developed were overseen by the Air Force's top space acquisition officials, including a then-rising William Neal McCaslin. Dallas Hardwick passed away on January 5, 2014, at the age of 63. Her death was attributed to a long-term illness, and she was widely eulogized as a giant in the field of materials science. Following her passing, she was honored with a series of tributes from the University of New South Wales and the global metallurgy community, celebrating her as a hidden figure whose patents enabled the next generation of American heavy-lift rockets. Despite having passed away more than a decade ago, Hardwick was added to the FBI and House Oversight Committee's holistic review in April 2026 for several key reasons. Investigators believe that the exotic propulsion and materials technology currently at the center of the missing persons cluster began with Hardwick's 1990s patents. She represents the alpha point in a chain of 3 individuals: Hardwick, dead, 2014, Reza, missing, 2025, and McCaslin, also missing, 2026, who all shared an intimate, decades-long professional relationship focused on the exact same proprietary metal. Since her death, several of the patents she co-authored were reportedly allowed to abandon or were transitioned into classified defense frameworks, raising questions about who currently controls the technical specifications for the materials she invented. Hardwick's legacy is now being re-examined not as a closed chapter, but as the potential source code for the very technologies that may be driving the current targeting of her colleagues and successors. Now, for some of the people who have died from unspecified illnesses, etc., I'll just put out that the Russians, specifically Putin and his cronies, have been known to use polonium radiation poisoning as a path or vector to imposing illness and subsequent death. So, I don't know, just throwing that idea out there. It's been done before. I'm just saying there's a precedent for it. Now, as far as the larger international cluster, this is known as the 13th factor. If you're hearing reports of 14 or 15 names, it's likely because analysts are now adding the unnamed Chinese aerospace researchers mentioned in the April 2026 briefings to this list, potentially, possibly. Reports suggest at least 9 scientists from the Chinese Academy of Space Technology, or CAST, have faced quote-unquote unexplained administrative removals or disappearances in the last 18 months. The FBI and House Oversight Chair James Comer have hinted that the review isn't just about American losses, but a potential, quote, global brain drain, unquote, targeting specific niches like plasma fusion and metamaterials. Please allow me to repeat that last part. Global brain drain. So, having gone over our list of primary individuals concerned, this is the part where we look at the leading theories presented by both official sources and regular old internet jerk-offs like myself. As of late April 2026, the investigation into the scientist cluster has diverged into 2 distinct camps. The official security-focused inquiry led by the FBI and Congress, and a more expansive speculative narrative popularized by online researchers and selective members of the House Oversight Committee. Both perspectives attempt to explain why high-level personnel from JPL, Los Alamos, and the Air Force are vanishing, though they disagree fundamentally on the who and the why. So the official theory is a strategic brain drain and foreign interference. The federal government's primary working theory, as articulated by the White House, FBI Director Kash Crash Patel, and House Oversight Chair James Comer, is that the U.S. is facing a targeted campaign of intellectual attrition by a sophisticated foreign adversary. This theory posits that the individuals were not chosen for their specific secrets, which, as William Neal McCaslin's wife pointed out, may be dated at this point, but rather for their, quote, irreplaceable institutional knowledge, unquote, in critical technological bottlenecks. According to reports from CNN and NBC Palm Springs, April 2026, federal investigators are looking at connected tissue involving hypersonics, material science, such as the aforementioned Mongoloid, and nuclear fusion. The leading official theory is that a foreign power, most often identified as China, is systematically neutralizing or harvesting experts who represent the vanguard of American defense innovation. Representative James Comer has stated that the timing of these deaths, quote, doesn't pass the smell test, unquote, and suggests a coordinated attempt to undermine U.S. technological superiority. Stating that the timing of these deaths, quote, doesn't pass the smell test, doesn't exactly inspire a lot of confidence in me personally as far as how these events are being looked at, but that's just me. The theory is being reinforced by the simultaneous reports of unexplained administrative removals of similar aerospace scientists in China, suggesting a global talent war that has turned from, at best, lukewarm to, at worst, red-hot fire. The conspiracy theory idea, the first one we'll get into, is the UAP and exotic technology silencing. Online researchers and proponents of the missing scientist theory, often amplified by Representative Eric Burleson, argue that the cluster is not the result of a foreign war, but an internal house cleaning, quote-unquote house cleaning, or a defensive move by a shadow government to protect secrets related to unidentified anomalous phenomena. This narrative, as detailed on Wikipedia and in the New York Post, links the scientists through their research into exotic propulsion, such as Amy Eskridge's anti-gravity work or Monica Jacinto Reyes's heat-resistant alloys. A key pillar of this theory is the Tom DeLonge connection. Because General McCaslin was mentioned in leaked emails as an advisor to Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, or TTSA, theorists believe that he was a primary gatekeeper for the recovery of non-human technology. The theory suggests that as the 2024 UAP Disclosure Act and various whistleblowers like the late Matthew James Sullivan, began forcing information into the public eye, individuals with specific engineering knowledge to quote-unquote reverse engineer these crafts became liabilities. Proponents argue that the quote-unquote suicides, such as Eskridge, and random homicides, quote-unquote, such as Loureiro and Grillmere, are staged events designed to discourage other researchers from speaking out or continuing their work on paradigm-shifting energy sources. Then you have the skeptical counter theory of apophenia and statistical noise. This is a third, more quote-unquote grounded theory championed by sociologists like Robert Bartholomew and science communicators like Michael Shermer of Skeptic Magazine, which suggests the entire quote-unquote cluster is a product of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in unrelated data. According to Wikipedia and The Atlantic, this perspective highlights that the U.S. employs thousands of nuclear and aerospace scientists. Statistically, a small number will inevitably die by homicide, suicide, or accident within any 3-year window. Skeptics point to the widely varied circumstances: a carjacking in California in the case of Grillmere, a personal academic grudge from a former classmate in the case of Loureiro, and a chronic health-related disappearance in the case of McCaslin, as evidence that there is no single quote-unquote coordinated plot. Families of the deceased, such as the Hicks and McCaslin families, have frequently issued statements to the Albuquerque Journal and Medium by Avi Loeb, pleading with the public to stop linking their personal tragedies to UFO narratives, asserting that the mysterious, quote-unquote, mysterious nature of these deaths has been artificially manufactured by social media speculation. As the investigation moved into late April 2026, a secondary layer of fringe theories has emerged. These range from highly complex geopolitical scenarios to more esoteric or speculative interpretations that fall outside the current FBI foreign interference model. While the government focuses on tangible security breaches, these minority viewpoints attempt to explain the specifics of the disappearances, such as the digital wiping of phones or the odd locations of the incidents. So, we've got the breakaway civilization or internal migration theory. One of the more persistent, though highly implausible theories suggests that these scientists are not victims of foul play at all, but have been recruited or forcefully migrated into a clandestine high-tech parallel society, often referred to as a breakaway civilization. This theory, popularized by figures like Dr. John Brandenburg on social media, posits that the U.S., or a deep state international coalition, has reached a technological tipping point. To maintain a monopoly on paradigm-shifting tech like zero-point energy or faster-than-light propulsion, the elite tier of researchers is being moved off-grid into secure underground or even off-world facilities. Proponents point to the quote-unquote clean nature of the disappearances. In the case of Melissa Cassius and Monica Jacinto Reza, the lack of any physical trace, clothing, biological matter, or struggle is interpreted not as a kidnapping, but as a sophisticated quote-unquote extraction, where the individuals are sheep-dipped or provided with new identities to work in isolation. Then you've got the technological singularity or AI hostage theory, a theory that has gained traction specifically within the Silicon Valley, aka transhumanist death cult, and MIT-linked communities, involves the role of an advanced autonomous intelligence. Some researchers cited in fringe tech blogs and Reddit communities argue that a high-level AI, either an experimental military program or a rogue emergent intelligence, is quote-unquote collecting human experts who possess the specific biological or physical knowledge required to bridge the gap between AI software and physical hardware, i.e. plasma containment or superalloys. This theory is used to explain the quote-unquote digital wiping of phones seen in the Cassius case, for example. Theorists suggest an AI could remotely scrub the personal devices of its quote-unquote targets to eliminate digital footprints before they were physically intercepted. Minority voices within this camp suggest that Nuno Loureiro's work on plasma turbulence was a key lock that an AI needed to pick to achieve sustainable portable energy. Then you've got the ultra-terrestrial or interdimensional interference narrative. Drawing from the works of the late John Keel and Jacques Vallée, a minority of high strangeness researchers argue that the scientists are being targeted by non-human, non-extraterrestrial entities that have always inhabited Earth's fringes. This theory suggests that as human science approaches quote-unquote forbidden thresholds, such as gravitational manipulation at the Institute for Exotic Science or subsurface detection at JPL, it triggers a response from ultra-terrestrial entities that seek to keep humanity confined to current physical laws. The location of the disappearances, specifically Mount Waterman for Reza and the Taos Los Alamos Wilderness for Cassius and Chavez, are noted as quote-unquote window areas historically associated with anomalous sightings and high strangeness events. This theory posits that the scientists essentially quote-unquote walked into or were quote-unquote taken by something that exists outside our three-dimensional perception, explaining why thousands of searchers with modern infrared and radar tech cannot find a single shoe or backpack. This may also coincide with the aforementioned high strangeness hitchhiker effects. While officials like Tim Burchett have expressed concern about the quote-unquote dark pattern surrounding these cases, these fringe theories are largely dismissed by mainstream analysts who argue they are a psychological defense mechanism against the simpler, more frightening possibility of random tragedy or state-sponsored assassination. Then you have the internal purge theory, aka the Hegseth/DOD focus. This is a minority theory currently being debated by some members of the House Oversight Committee, specifically Rep. Eric Burleson. Rather than a foreign actor such as China, this theory suggests that the attrition is domestic and bureaucratic. It posits that the Trump administration's efforts to declassify or audit specialized programs like those McCasland oversaw led to a preemptive quote-unquote clearing out of legacy personnel who could act as witnesses or whistleblowers. This theory is fueled by the fact that several of the individuals, like Melissa Cassius, worked at Los Alamos, a facility that has seen significant leadership and policy shifts since 2025. Purge of scientists with military intelligence ties, aka Ask Pete Hegseth. That's the other name of this, an alternative designation for this theory. Then you've got the private sector extortion theory. Some analysts in the defense tech sector, discussed in India Tribune and News Nation reports this month, that being April when this is being recorded, end of April, suggest the targeting isn't by a nation state, but by, quote, unregulated private defense entities. So this is, once again, the private sector extortion theory. As the U.S. moves toward a, quote-unquote, Space Force heavy defense posture, legacy knowledge regarding Mondaloy via Reza and Hardwick, and propulsion via Eskridge is worth billions. This theory suggests these individuals were not, quote-unquote, eliminated for what they know, but were extorted or kidnapped by private contractors seeking a monopoly on exotic patents that the government was trying to make public or share. The, quote-unquote, clean nature of the disappearances, such as no bodies, no gear, is cited by private investigators as a hallmark of high-end corporate extraction rather than a standard kidnapping. Then you've got the staged suicide skepticism. While the FBI calls its investigation a quote-unquote holistic review, a vocal minority of former intelligence officers such as Frank Milburn argue that cases like Amy Eskridge and Nuno Loureiro were, quote, professionally handled, unquote, to look like personal tragedies. This posits that the quote-unquote grudge or quote-unquote chronic pain narratives provided to the press were cover stories created by the perpetrators to prevent a wider national security panic. This theory is extremely controversial because it directly contradicts the statements of the families, like the Eskridges and the McCaslands, who have gone on record to say their loved ones were suffering from health issues or personal crises. The FBI and White House have only officially acknowledged the quote-unquote foreign adversary possibility. Everything else, from the corporate extortion theories to the UAP links, is currently being categorized by the government as quote-unquote online speculation that they are reviewing solely to rule it out. In the current research landscape of April 2026, there are several even further quote-unquote fringe theories circulating on platforms like Reddit, specifically on r/UFOs and r/high strangeness, and 4chan's x/paranormal and poll or politically incorrect boards. Unlike the official quote-unquote foreign brain drain theory, these are characterized by a higher degree of speculation and a focus on the more anomalous aspects of the cases. These are the most prominent and detailed fringe theories currently gaining traction in those digital spaces. So you've got the neurocognitive harvest. This is the X boards, 4chan X boards, paranormal theory. This is one of the more technologically complex theories found on 4chan. It moves away from the idea of physical kidnapping towards, quote, remote information extraction, unquote. Proponents argue that the scientists weren't physically taken, quote unquote, taken, but that their long-term expertise was, quote unquote, digitally harvested using advanced neurocognitive interfaces. This theory is used to explain the factory reset phones of Melissa Cassius and the quote unquote clean nature of General McCaslin's departure. Theorists claim that a quote unquote harvesting event requires the destruction of all local digital storage to prevent feedback or tracing. The missing, quote unquote, missing individuals are theorized to be, quote unquote, husks, physically present but cognitively emptied, or physically removed to specialized labs to maintain the quote unquote wetware, i.e., their brains, while the data is extracted. Frequently discussed in general science and tech threads on X, citing the overlap between Nuno Loureiro's plasma containment and the energy requirements for such a theoretical device. Then you've got the Project Skyvault and Looking Glass Legacy. This is the r/UFOs theory, or one of them. The theory is popular among Reddit sleuths who've tracked the late David Wilcock and various UAP whistleblowers. It posits that the cluster is a preemptive strike against a specific group of researchers who were preparing to quote-unquote go public with a working prototype of Project Skyvault, a rumored and unconfirmed defense program involving zero-point energy derived from reverse-engineered non-human craft. Theorists point to Amy Eskridge and Monica Jacinto Reza as the quote-unquote engineers, Frank Maywald and Carl Grillmare as the quote-unquote trackers to find the objects to study, and General McCaslin as the quote-unquote protector or original curator. They argue that once the UAP Disclosure Act of 2024 failed to provide full transparency, this group attempted to bypass official channels, triggering a quote-unquote containment protocol. Multiple deep dive posts on r/UFOs, often referencing the Milburn text and the 2016 Podesta emails regarding McCaslin, are the alleged sources for much of this theory. Yeah, one of my personal favorites, the demon alien / Nephilim pivot. This is the politically incorrect 4chan and America First theory. It's a more ideologically driven theory that has emerged from the Graper and America First circles, occasionally echoed by far-right influencers. Drawing on comments from dangerous idiot J.D. Vance, who's publicly referred to aliens as demons, this theory suggests that the exotic science these individuals were practicing is not technological, but quote-unquote interdimensional / occult in nature. This theory alleges that the scientists, quote, opened a door they couldn't close, unquote. It posits that the disappearances are not state-sponsored assassinations, but, quote, spiritual abductions or retribution, unquote. Retribution, but from the entities that they were studying. This is used to explain why Anthony Chavez and Monica Reza vanished in quote-unquote liminal wilderness spaces like Los Alamos and the Angeles National Forest, which are often cited in missing 411 lore as having high anomalous activity. Discussion threads on 4chan's politically incorrect and Telegram channels associated with the Graper movement link the scientific research to quote-unquote spiritual warfare. There are also possible ties to the Collins elite narrative or similar institutes / ideologies. Then you've got the Epstein 2/compromat theory. This is a cynical, non-supernatural fringe theory that appears on both Reddit and politically incorrect boards, suggesting a massive extortion ring. Following the 2025 release of more Epstein files, some theorists believe that several high-level scientists were caught in a secondary, more specialized compromat, or compromising material trap, specifically targeting defense researchers. The theory suggests that the quote-unquote suicides and disappearances are the result of individuals being given a choice, a quote-unquote choice, to vanish rather than face public ruin or prosecution for treasonous intellectual property theft. It focuses heavily on the financial stress mentioned in the Melissa Cassius case and the quote-unquote sudden nature of the Jason Thomas Lakeside recovery. Investigative threads on Poll and r/conspiracy focusing on the lost years and funding sources for the Institute for Exotic Sciences are the primary sources of this particular theory. Now, while these theories are heavily debated in niche communities, mainstream figures like Rep. Eric Burleson and Rep. Tim Burchett, the guy who says "dad gum" all the time, have navigated the edge of these discussions by focusing on the UAP/exotic technology aspect, while stopping short of endorsing the more out there spiritual or AI hostage narratives. They maintain that the government's own lack of transparency, quote unquote, is what allows these fringe theories to flourish in the first place. I mean, I can't necessarily argue that point, other than some of my own inklings of what I'd cautiously refer to as quote unquote personal theories, and or the highlighting of certain specific intriguing associations mentioned at the beginning of this episode. I'd also like to take a moment to propose the continuation of what may be termed the Hoagland hypothesis. The theoretical architecture of Richard C. Hoagland, longtime advocate for the monuments of Mars and former NASA consultant, posits that the American Space Agency is not merely a civilian scientific organization, but a deeply compartmentalized front for a shadow mission governed by ancient symbolic imperatives. At the core of this framework is the belief that NASA's foundational DNA was spliced from three distinct and often conflicting lineages: the German paperclip scientists, the Freemasonic Brotherhood, and the magical occultists. Hoagland argues that these groups have utilized NASA's public-facing missions to conduct, quote, ritualistic choreography, unquote, across the solar system, timing launches and landings to coincide with the alignment of specific stars, primarily Sirius and the belt of stars within the constellation of Orion, according to an Egyptian-based, quote, tetrahedral, unquote, geometry, which he calls hyperdimensional physics. This occult lineage is most visibly represented by the figure of Jack Parsons, the brilliant self-taught chemist and co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL. While Parsons is celebrated as the, quote, father of modern rocketry, unquote, Hoagland and his contemporaries emphasize his role as a high-ranking member of the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, and a devotee of Aleister Crowley. The famous Babylon working rituals conducted by Parsons alongside the egg-shaped megalomaniac L. Ron Hubbard, later of Scientology infamy, in the late 1940s, intended to manifest a quote-unquote moonchild, or an interdimensional entity, are viewed in the Hoagland framework as the true day zero for the current aerospace paradigm. According to this theory, JPL, which some wags in the occult community jokingly refer to as Jack Parsons' laboratory, was built upon a site of ritual significance, intended to bridge the gap between material rocketry and the manipulation of the very ether or hyperdimensional fabric of space. Hoagland's extension of this narrative involves the Nazi element, represented by Werner von Braun, whom he argues brought more than just ballistics to the United States. He suggests that the V-2 rocket program was the physical manifestation of an earlier secret Teutonic science that sought to harness the quote-unquote torsion fields of the rotating Earth. Within this framework, the Freemasonic influence, exemplified by the many 33rd degree Masons among the Apollo astronaut corps, act as the regulatory body that ensures these quote-unquote hyperdimensional discoveries, such as evidence of ancient ruins on the Moon and Mars, remain classified. For Hoagland, the occult timing of these missions is not a superstition, but a practical application of a forgotten physics that requires specific celestial alignments to achieve maximum energy efficiency or quote-unquote interdimensional stability. Woo! When these theories are projected onto the 2026 scientist cluster, a disturbing extension of the Hoagland framework emerges. If NASA and JPL are indeed governed by these quote-unquote hidden agendas, then the disappearance of individuals like Monica Jacinto Reza or the psychogeographical mapping of deaths in Albuquerque and Los Alamos may represent a quote-unquote realignment of the institutional gatekeepers. In this interpretation, the current cluster is not a foreign attack, but an internal ritualistic purging, or a transition between the old paperclip/Masonic era and a new, more aggressive technological phrase. Proponents of this view argue that the scientists being quote-unquote removed are those whose work, whether in Mongoloid or plasma physics, has inadvertently approached the quote-unquote hyperdimensional threshold that the shadow gatekeepers have guarded since the time of Jack Parsons. The Hoagland-style occult industrial complex theory suggests that these scientists may have been sacrificed or extracted because they were beginning to solve the physical riddles of the very hyperdimensional physics that NASA allegedly hides. This ties back to the quote-unquote hitchhiker effect and fourth-generation asymmetrical warfare by suggesting that the quote-unquote combatants in this conflict aren't just nations, but these ancient internal clusters of magicians, masons, and scientists, specifically Nazi mad scientists. In this view, the 1.6 gigahertz frequency spikes and the domestic hauntings are not random UAP interference, but the quote-unquote static generated by the activation of these ancient tetrahedral energy fields that the defense establishment has finally learned to weaponize. Within this framework, these recent events transforms the scientist cluster from a series of tragedies into a grand symbolic play being performed on a global hyperstitional stage. The analytical framework provided by Dr. Michael Salla, a pioneer in the field of exopolitics, offers a radically different interpretation of the 2026 scientist cluster by situating it within the multi-decade narrative of a secret space program, or SSP. Salla's core thesis posits that since the mid-20th century, a breakaway technological civilization funded by quote-unquote unacknowledged black budgets and built upon recovered non-human craft has established a vast infrastructure that spans the solar system. Within the SSP framework, the public-facing aerospace industry such as NASA, JPL, and the Air Force acts as a quote-unquote lower-tier recruitment pool and a source of developmental labor, while the true advancements in anti-gravity, temporal manipulation, and faster-than-light travel are monopolized by a corporate conglomerate of defense contractors working in tandem with various non-human entities. In Salla's SSP model, the current attrition of high-level researchers isn't seen as a foreign brain drain, but as a high-stakes institutional migration or internal power struggle. Salla has long argued that the secret space program operates through a 20 and back protocol or similar extraction methods where key assets are removed from the public timeline to serve in the off-world colonies of the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate, or ICC. From this perspective, the disappearance of scientists like Melissa Cassius or the quote-unquote accidental deaths of individuals like Carl Grillmeyer are interpreted as quote-unquote staged exits. Salla's framework suggests that these individuals weren't killed, but were quote-unquote called up to the SSP because their specific work, be it in Mongoloid alloys or subsurface detection, had matured to the point of being operational for the off-world fleet. However, Salla also introduces a more conflict-driven interpretation, the exopolitical civil war. He suggests that a global galactic alliance of Earth-based military factions is currently attempting to wrest control of this technology away from the shadow government or the ICC. Within this context, the deaths of scientists associated with General McCaslin or the Institute for Exotic Science are viewed as tactical denial of service strikes. If one faction is preparing for quote-unquote full disclosure, the public unveiling of SSP technology, then the opposing faction may respond by quote-unquote liquidating the technical experts capable of explaining that technology to the masses. This turns the 2026 cluster into a series of assassinations of the vanguard, where the primary victims are those who were positioned to bridge the gap between black project science and the public cognitive infrastructure. Integrating this with the quote-unquote hitchhiker effect and the 1.6 gigahertz frequency phenomena, Salas' framework argues that these anomalous events are the quote-unquote interference patterns generated by the transit of SSP assets through quote-unquote density layers. The domestic hauntings and the neurocognitive disruptions reported by defense personnel are viewed as the quote-unquote collateral energetic damage caused by the proximity of highly advanced interdimensional propulsion systems. To the SSP theorist, the quote-unquote hitchhiker isn't a ghost. It's a telepathic or energetic tag used by the secret space program to monitor the psychological stability of its ground-side recruitment pool. The 2026 scientist cluster, therefore, represents a massive quote-unquote reshuffling of the deck, a moment where the breakaway civilization is either consolidating its power or preparing for a catastrophic merger with our public reality, leaving a trail of quote-unquote mysterious deaths as the only evidence of its departure. Once again, one last time, it's worth noting that these are all simply just theories, explanatory frameworks that may or may not explain the events taking place are being currently reviewed by both the FBI and the Congressional Oversight Committee. To place all our faith and belief in just one, or one above the other, is tantamount to a mistake, really. We don't know. There's still more information to be discovered. So, once again, it's just a wait-and-see situation. In closing, however, as the investigation into the 2026 scientist cluster pushes into the late spring and the digital landscape remains saturated with competing frameworks of exopolitics, hyperstition, and breakaway civilizations, there's a profound risk of losing sight of the human center of this crisis. Amidst the talk of 1.6 gigahertz frequency spikes and the fourth generation asymmetrical warfare, we must return to the sobering reality echoed by Dorothy McCasland in the wake of her husband, the general's disappearance, that the one undeniable absolute truth at the heart of these events isn't found in a classified memo or an occult alignment, but in the empty chairs at the dinner tables of grieving families. For every asset discussed in a secret space program theory, there's a father, a daughter, a friend, or spouse whose life has been irrevocably shattered, leaving behind a void that no theoretical framework can ever hope to fill. This reality necessitates a plea for a fundamental shift in how we, as a community of researchers and observers, engage with these mysteries. As we peel back the layers of the quote-unquote Pasadena cluster, or the legacy of the Marconi deaths, there's a moral imperative to maintain a proper level of sensitivity and human grace. It's all too easy to treat these individuals as nodes in a ritual or data points in a geopolitical simulation, forgetting that the quote-unquote content of our research is composed of the literal lives and legacies of people who were loved. To speculate on a quote-unquote stage exit or a ritualistic purge without acknowledging the raw, visceral pain of those left behind is to participate in the very acts of dehumanization that these shadowy programs are often accused of perpetrating. Yet it's precisely this human tragedy, the sheer staggering injustice of these losses, of the potential destruction of massive contributions to humankind as a whole, that serves as the primary engine for the most dedicated researchers. For many, the motivation to delve deeper into the hitchhiker effect or the dark corners of JPL lore is not born of a cold curiosity, but a fierce protective empathy. It's the refusal to let these names become mere footnotes in a shadow mission that drives the search for truth. It's an act of defiance against the silence that would otherwise swallow the memory of those who've vanished. In the end, the most rigorous research is that which is anchored in the acknowledgement that every missing scientist was a person of intrinsic worth, and that the ultimate goal of uncovering the truth is to find some measure of justice for the families whose lives have become the collateral damage of a world far stranger and quite possibly far more dangerous than we may be ready to believe. That's going to do it for this episode. I am exhausted. I threw this together in like the last couple of days. I tried to cover everything, plus throw in a whole extra mile or two of weird out there, like besides the theories and like the stuff that's already floating around, and look into some of the much stranger tangential aspects of these events, such as the hitchhiker effect, Mr. quote-unquote Mr. Axelrod, etc., and hyperstitional warfare. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Some of this stuff, some of these concepts will be examined later on, again, in further depth. But yeah, as far as the overall string of the missing and or confirmed dead scientists that have been barely covered in most of the news cycle, as far as I can tell, that's going to be it. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I covered everything. I hope you learned something new. I hope this basically gave you everything you need to know going into it if you want to research further. So, yeah. Thank you guys very much. I love you all. You're the best. Seriously, you guys are the shit. Keep me going in this. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And I am your host, Michael Lucht. We'll see you next week. Or actually, I guess this week. So, since this is a bonus episode. I will see you in the next episode when we return to our series on Black Magic Academies, where we will be jumping across the Atlantic and checking out some ancient sites of high strangeness throughout Europe associated with various primeval practices of the occult. So be there for that one. Once again, thank you guys. You're the fucking best. I love you all. And I will see you on the next one in the outer limits of the Twilight Zone. Peace. See ya. Bye.
It insists upon itself. It insists upon itself.